The 90s gave us Tamagotchis, Power Rangers, and VHS movies, but they also left behind something that few remember. In the midst of all that nostalgia, some of the most chilling mysteries ever recorded took place. Senseless disappearances, inexplicable phenomena, and conspiracies so unsettling they seem pulled from a movie. Some of these had answers, and others remain unresolved. So, get comfortable and turn off the lights, because these are 7 unsettling mysteries from the 90s. Remember that you can also listen to us on Spotify or your favorite podcast platform. How are you? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Let's begin. The Skinwalker Ranch. Between 1994 and 1996, a quiet 207-hectare cattle property in Utah, USA, became the epicenter of a series of phenomena so strange and persistent that its own inhabitants fled in terror. We are talking about the infamous Skinwalker Ranch, a place whose name commands respect on its own, for in Navajo tradition, skinwalkers are witches capable of transforming into animals evil beings linked to darkness, the forbidden, and death. Although the ranch is not in Navajo territory, but on the lands of the Ute tribe, legends of ancient spells, curses, and blood-sealed pacts have surrounded that part of the desert for centuries, making the area simply hair-raising. It was the Sherman family, the owners of the ranch in the 90s, who lived through a 2-year nightmare that felt like something out of a horror movie. It all began in mid-1994 when Terry and Gwen Sherman moved to the ranch with the hope of finding a quiet life in the countryside, raising cattle and getting away from the bustle of the cities. However, it wasn't long before they realized they had bought much more than just a simple property, as very strange things began to happen almost immediately. One night, the family witnessed a series of luminous spheres hovering over the land. These multicolored orbs moved at impossible speeds, sometimes chasing the livestock and other times simply floating in the middle of the field. But the most shocking part of these sightings was, without a doubt, the presence of huge metallic structures that would suddenly hover over the ranch without making a sound. They were just there, floating, lurking. And as if that weren't enough, the phenomena also began to manifest on solid ground. The Shermans started to notice the appearance of creatures impossible to explain. The most famous encounter of this kind happened one afternoon when a gigantic wolf approached the family with total calm. Terry, terrified, took his hunting rifle and fired several times. However, despite the short distance, the wolf did not flinch and did not appear wounded. The bullets had gone through it, yes, but it wasn't bleeding, it didn't move, and it didn't even emit a sound of pain. It just walked away with the same calm with which it had arrived. They tried to follow its trail, guided by the huge tracks the animal had left, but after a few meters, they simply disappeared as if the creature had vanished into thin air. And this was not an isolated case. At one point, several members of the family reported seeing humanoid figures lurking among the trees, tall, thin shadows that would scurry away when someone tried to approach. They also encountered a truly grotesque sight on several occasions. Some bulls and cows appeared in the middle of the field, dead in an extremely disturbing manner. They did not appear to have been attacked by predators. They had been mutilated with surgical precision, with clean cuts, and not a single drop of blood on the bodies. One cow had a perfectly circular hole in its eye and part of its udder. On another occasion, they found another bull without life. But the eerie thing here is that it looked as if something had extracted all the muscle from inside the skin, leaving only the bones. The problem is that there was not a single trace of blood on the ground. It was as if they had done it without breaking the animal's skin, something that, needless to say, is completely impossible. These mutilations, along with the sightings in the sky, reinforced the idea that everything was connected and that something beyond human comprehension was happening at that ranch. But perhaps the worst part for the Shermans was that they weren't even safe inside their own home. Gwen reported that daily activity sometimes became chaos. Objects would disappear and reappear in impossible places. Voices were heard conversing in unknown languages right outside the windows. Doors would open and close on their own, the lights would flicker, and the atmosphere became increasingly oppressive. On one occasion, Gwen left the kitchen for a few moments, and when she returned, she found the entire pantry wide open. All the doors were like that, and the objects stored inside were thrown on the floor as if someone had ripped them out with fury. They also found strange circles and holes in the earth, as if something very heavy had landed there. And frequently, electronic devices would stop working without an apparent explanation, as if an invisible force was affecting everything around it. The whole situation became unsustainable. Soon the Shermans were on the verge of an emotional collapse. And for a moment, for a single second, put yourself in their shoes and imagine living like that, with constant fear, not knowing what new unpleasant surprise awaits you at the end of the day, or worse, during the night. It was thus that after 2 long years, they finally decided to sell the property in 1996. But here the story takes a new turn, as the ranch was quickly bought by Robert Bigelow, a billionaire magnate and an enthusiast of ufology and paranormal topics. Robert paid just $200,000 for the property, an absurdly low price considering the size of the land. He immediately sent a team of experts to install cameras, sensors, and surveillance systems. The tycoon was recognized for funding research into anomalous phenomena and for being the founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, recruiting scientists, ex-military personnel, retired agents, and all kinds of people prepared to face the unknown and study paranormal events. But not even these experts were ready for what they were going to experience. One night in March 1997, biochemist Colm Kelleher was patrolling the property. Suddenly, he noticed a dark figure perched high in a tree. This being did not seem to be an animal, as its silhouette was too large and heavy. It had human characteristics, but no features could be distinguished on it. The most unsettling things were its eyes, which were bright and yellow, observing the biochemist directly, who stood stunned. After a few moments, Kelleher aimed his weapon and fired at the creature, which immediately fled and disappeared into the brush. When the man approached the spot, he only found a gigantic footprint in the snow that had several deep claw marks, which, it was said, did not match any existing animal. This event, one of those that most marked the researchers, reaffirmed the feeling that something anomalous inhabited that ranch. Throughout the following years, Bigelow's staff lived through more baffling episodes, events that always occurred unpredictably. Every time they installed cameras or equipment to try to record what was happening, it seemed that the activity would stop or move to another place, deliberately dodging any attempt to be documented, as if something were mocking the research team while simultaneously avoiding being seen. Finally, after years of study, the book Hunt for the Skinwalker was published in 2005, where many of these experiences were documented. But the investigations never really reached a definitive conclusion. Robert Bigelow eventually decided to sell the ranch to new owners in 2016, and shortly after, History Channel launched a television series called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, where they showed how a new team tried to discover the origin of these anomalies, this time with even more advanced technology. So far, they have not achieved much more than what the Sherman family achieved 3 decades ago, feeling constantly watched and frightened. As was to be expected for this type of story, theories were not long in coming. Some point directly to the supernatural. It is said that it could be a kind of dimensional window, a portal through which creatures from other worlds can access ours. Others claim that the ancient Navajo shamans cursed the lands with skinwalkers to torment the Ute, with whom they had conflicts throughout their history. There are also those who believe everything has a more earthly explanation. Secret military bases where advanced technology is tested, easily mistaken for orbs or spaceships. And according to this idea, the mutilated animals would not be the work of beings from another world, but simple victims of undercover experiments. And of course, there is also the possibility that it is all a fraud, that the Shermans invented or exaggerated everything to gain fame and money, although being realistic, they did not win much from that, as they sold the ranch at an aggressively low price. However, it should be clarified that the Uinta Basin region in the state of Utah already had a long history of UFO sightings and strange phenomena before the events reported at the Skinwalker Ranch. In the end, this iconic place remains a great enigma. The testimonies are there, both from the Sherman family and the researchers, but physical evidence is conspicuously absent. Even so, this ranch has earned its place as one of the most strange and terrifying mysteries of the 90s. The Varginha UFO Incident. This case, known as the Brazilian Roswell, was so impactful that the city of Varginha even built a water tower in the shape of a flying saucer as a reminder of the UFO incident they experienced in 1996. It all began in the early hours of January 20th, when several residents claimed to have seen an unidentified flying object crossing the sky. One of them, Carlos de Souza, described a cigar-shaped artifact the size of a school bus that was descending slowly while emitting white smoke. Hours later, around 8 p.m., Three young women sisters, Lillian and Valkyria Silva, along with their friend Katia Andrade, were walking through a vacant lot when they stumbled upon a strange creature crouching next to a wall that seemed to be hiding in fear. They described it as a short being with brownish-green skin and an oily texture. Its head was disproportionately large, with bright red eyes and bumps on the top of its head. The entity seemed dazed or perhaps wounded. Frightened, the girls ran away and told their mother what they had seen. They said they had seen the devil. Upon returning to the spot to check, the mother did not find the creature, but perceived a very strong and quite unpleasant odor. From that moment on, rumors began to circulate about the presence of extraterrestrial beings in the city. Witnesses claimed to have seen military and fire department personnel cordoning off specific areas. It was also reported that at least 2 of these strange creatures had been captured and transferred to military and medical facilities. One of the most notorious cases was that of military policeman Marco Cerese, who supposedly captured one of these creatures with his own hands. Sadly, days later, the officer died due to a generalized infection, which fueled theories about possible contamination by unknown biological agents. In addition, there were reports of inexplicable animal deaths at the local zoo, coinciding with the days following the incident. These deaths were attributed by some to the presence of the entities or exposure to unknown substances. Media coverage was intense and immediate. Television programs and international media, including the Wall Street Journal, disseminated the story, turning Varginha into a focal point for researchers and enthusiasts of the UFO phenomenon. However, Brazilian authorities officially denied any encounter with extraterrestrial beings. An army investigation concluded that the 3 young women had mistaken a local resident known as Mudinho, a man with mental and physical disabilities, for a supposed strange creature. A version that, of course, did not convince many. They also said that the presence of military vehicles in the area was due to routine maneuvers and had no relation to any extraordinary event. Many researchers and ufologists consider that there was a cover-up. Some suggest that the Brazilian government, possibly with the collaboration of the United States, hid information and evidence related to the incident. The 2022 documentary Moment of Contact, directed by James Fox, presents testimonies from both witnesses and former military personnel that reinforce these theories. Today, Varginha has embraced its UFO legacy. The city features a saucer-shaped water tower, as I told you at the beginning, and shops that sell souvenirs related to the ET of Varginha, as it is known. The incident remains one of the most intriguing and controversial cases in the history of UFO sightings. We covered this case in more detail in episodes 204 and 205 of our podcast Noctambulos, in case you want to know it in greater depth. The disappearance of Asha Degree. There are disappearances that, from the very first moment, seem to be surrounded by an aura of mystery that makes them stand out from other similar cases. And the story of Asha Degree is one of them. Asha was a girl of just 9 years old who disappeared, apparently voluntarily, in circumstances so strange that even today, more than 2 decades later, they remain very difficult to understand. She lived with her parents and her brother in the small town of Shelby in North Carolina, USA. She was described as a quiet, shy girl who was very close to her family. On the night of the 13th of February 2000, a thunderstorm lashed the entire region, causing a blackout at the Degree home. Asha went to sleep as usual, but at some point in the early morning, she got out of bed, took a bag she had previously packed, and left the house alone without anyone noticing, thus embarking on a solitary walk in the rain. Around 4:00 a.m., several drivers traveling on the highway saw with astonishment the little girl walking alone in the heavy rain. She was carrying a backpack and wearing light clothing that was not suitable for the cold, rainy weather. Furthermore, it was notable that Asha was moving along the road as if she knew exactly where she was going. She didn't look lost, nor did she look disoriented. 2 truckers who observed her reported the encounter later. One of them, concerned, turned around to try to talk to her, but the girl, seeing him approaching, got scared and ran into the forest bordering the highway, quickly disappearing into the trees. And this encounter would become the last time anyone saw her directly. When her parents woke up at 6:30 a.m. to get the children ready for school, they discovered with horror that Asha was not in her room. They searched the entire house, called her name, then went out into the neighborhood, and when they didn't find any trace of her, they immediately called the police. A search was initiated in the wooded area where she was last seen, but the conditions were very difficult. The storm had erased any trace, and the search dogs could not pick up her scent. The only thing found in a shed near the highway were some candy wrappers, a pencil, a marker, and a hair ribbon, all belonging to the girl. However, there was a very disturbing detail there. Along with all these objects, there was a photograph of another African-American girl of a similar age to hers. No one knew who the girl was, and to this day, she has not been identified. The find baffled everyone and caused a new question to arise. Why would Asha have a photo of another girl? Days began to pass, then weeks, and finally months, but there were no concrete advances. The search was maintained for a time, but as the days went by, the case began to go cold. There were no new leads, no witnesses, and no explanations. It was not until August 2001, more than a year after the disappearance, that an unexpected discovery shook the whole case. About 40 kilometers from her home, inside a construction site, several workers found a backpack buried and carefully wrapped in trash bags. After being analyzed, it was confirmed that it belonged to Asha Degree. Inside were several of her known belongings, but also two objects that no one in her family could recognize. A doctor. Seuss book titled McElligot's Pool and a New Kids on the block t-shirt. That discovery raised even more questions. If Asha didn't have those objects, where did they come from? Who put them there? Why bury her backpack in such a remote place and in such a careful way? This certainly seemed like a lead on a kidnapper, but the police could not find useful fingerprints or DNA that could link the find with any concrete suspect. Or at least none of this information was made public. And since then, different theories have emerged about what could have happened. One of the most discussed holds that someone, possibly an adult, managed to gain the girl's trust without anyone noticing. Perhaps this person convinced her to run away using some kind of promise or reward. Some even speculate on the possibility that another girl had been used as a lure, which would directly connect with the photograph found in the shed. If this theory were true, it would imply that Asha was the victim of a carefully planned crime, perhaps linked to child trafficking or a kidnapping for unknown purposes. Another line of investigation points to the fact that Asha could have planned to run away on her own. This idea is based on the fact that, shortly before, the girl had read a book at school called The Whipping Boy, where two children run away to live an adventure, something that perhaps could have influenced her childlike imagination, making her believe in her innocence that leaving home alone in the middle of the night could be the beginning of an exciting experience. In this scenario, after running away, perhaps she got lost in the forest, encountered someone dangerous, or suffered an accident from which she could not recover. It also cannot be ruled out that while she was running away in the rain, Asha fell somewhere difficult to access, like a well or a swollen stream, and that is why her remains were never found. But after more than 2 decades of searches and investigations, it remains very strange that not a single piece of clothing, a bone, or any sign of her has appeared. The only thing certain is that Asha Degree remains officially missing. Her family has never stopped looking for her nor keeping her case in the collective memory. Every year, they organize a walk from their house to the sign on the highway where she was last seen, doing this to remember her, to make noise, to also avoid the story of their daughter ending up falling into oblivion. For their part, the FBI and the local police have reopened the case on several occasions. In 2020, new leads were announced, and a possible person of interest, but so far no conclusive result has been achieved. Today, Asha would be over 30 years old, and periodically the authorities publish digitally generated images showing how she might look as an adult, thus trying to keep alive any possible recognition. But her absence still weighs because it is not the case of a rebellious teenager or a problematic home. There were no screams, there were no threats, there were no family fights before her departure. Just a 9-year-old girl who, in the middle of a rainy night, packed her backpack, opened the door, and went walking alone toward a destination that still remains a complete mystery. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe. You can also help us a lot by leaving a comment or recommending our channel to your friends. If you are on Spotify, don't forget to rate us with 5 stars. The disappearance of Susan Walsh. Of the cases of missing persons from the 90s, few are as mysterious as that of Susan Walsh. Susan was not just any anonymous person. At the time of her disappearance, in July 1996, she was an independent journalist in New York who had gained notoriety for her investigations into the darkest and murkiest side of the city. She was 36 years old and a mother of a 1-2-year-old boy. Her life had not been easy or common. In her youth, she had worked as an exotic dancer to pay for her studies, and later transformed these experiences into journalistic material, writing articles about the adult entertainment industry and its dangers. In 1995, she published The Village Boys, an explosive report on prostitution and the Russian mafia in strip clubs in New York, uncovering names and murky practices that surely angered more than one of those involved. She had also been interested lately in a very peculiar topic, the subculture of urban vampires, groups of people who adopted the vampiric aesthetic and even practiced consensual vampirism, that is, they drank the blood of others and also let others drink theirs. Susan had managed to infiltrate these circles to investigate them firsthand. With such topics, it is not surprising that her work could annoy dangerous people. And this was reflected on the 16th of July, 1996, when Susan disappeared without a trace right outside her home in Nutley, New Jersey. That morning, she left her son in the care of her ex-husband, with whom, despite being separated, she shared a house, although they lived on different floors, and mentioned to him that she would go out for a moment to make a phone call at the corner payphone. She even left behind her purse and keys, expecting to return immediately, but she never came back. When hours passed and nothing was heard of her, the police were notified and the search began. Susan's car was still parked, and there were no indications that she had planned a trip or an escape. She had not withdrawn money from the bank, nor had she packed clothes. She simply vanished in broad daylight. The investigators revealed few concrete data, but many possible suspicious motives. Susan's disappearance made noise in the press quickly, especially because she had become involved in delicate issues that she was investigating. Immediately, three main theories emerged. Given that Susan had publicly exposed connections between the Russian mafia and the strip club and prostitution business in the city, a strong possibility is that she was silenced by these criminal groups. It is known that after the publication of her article, Susan was quite paranoid about her safety. She told friends and family that she believed she was being followed. Her personal diary was investigated for clues, and it was found that she had written that she felt in danger. Perhaps she was going to reveal more compromising information, and someone decided she was a risk. If the mafia was involved, it is possible that they kidnapped her quickly on the street and subsequently murdered her, making her body disappear in the New Jersey area, since it is full of industrial zones and rivers where it would sadly be easy to get rid of someone. Another line of investigation focused on her immersion in the subculture of these supposed vampires, as Susan was investigating these groups that practiced nocturnal rituals and consumed blood. There is speculation that some unstable individual within this community became obsessed with her, whether for feeling that she was exposing their secrets or because of a personal fixation and that this supposed person could have harmed her. Even the idea of an unknown serial killer was briefly contemplated, since, let's remember, in the 90s, there were several of them active in that area, but there were no other cases similar enough to this one to be able to relate them. Some acquaintances of Susan mentioned that she had a history of addictions and emotional problems. She had dealt with alcohol and drugs, although she was apparently sober by then. She was also under a lot of work and financial pressure. So, another less popular hypothesis suggests that perhaps she suffered a nervous breakdown and decided to run away to start a new life in a kind of voluntary disappearance. However, many doubt this, since Susan loved her son and would not have just left him behind like that. Some people said they had supposedly seen her in the days following her disappearance in New York, wandering around confused. But none of this could be confirmed. No conclusive evidence was ever obtained, no security camera videos, nor direct witnesses to the moment of her disappearance. This case even appeared on Unsolved Mysteries. The famous television program dedicated an episode to her in 1997. A good number of books and articles have also been written about her and her mysterious disappearance. Officially, the file remains open, but the authorities admit that there are no active leads. In 2006, 10 years after her disappearance, Susan Walsh was legally declared deceased, although her father and relatives were still awaiting real answers. At the time of recording this video, 29 years later, we do not know what became of Susan, and sadly her son grew up never knowing the whereabouts of his mother. The hypotheses are too many, but if she was a victim of the mafia, it is likely that her body will never be found, nor will it be confirmed what really happened, as those people know well how to cover their tracks. If it was some other cause, it still remains hidden among the shadows and the most remote alleys of the big city. The disappearance of Derek Engebretson. The next mystery takes us to the cold mountains of Oregon in the northern United States, where one winter day a child went out to look for a Christmas tree and never returned. Derek James Engebretson, 8 years old, disappeared on the 5th of December 1998 in the area of Winemah National Forest near Klamath Lake. That afternoon, Derek had gone out together with his father, Robert, and his grandfather, heading to a wooded area known as Pelican Butte. The family had the tradition of cutting their own Christmas pine tree every year, and that day they were in search of the perfect tree. Upon arriving, they parked their vehicle and went into the snowy forest. At some point, Derek separated a few meters from his family and moved ahead while his father and grandfather were chopping down a tree. By the time they realized it, the boy was no longer in sight. At first, they thought he might be playing hide-and-seek behind a nearby log, but after several minutes of calling him without response, the concern turned into panic. As it was starting to get dark, the temperature was dropping rapidly, and a snowstorm was approaching them. Robert, desperate, left the forest to the nearest road and stopped a driver to ask for help. Thus, near 4:15 inches the afternoon, the authorities received the report of the disappearance. The following hours were critical. A heavy snowfall started, which immediately complicated the search efforts. Despite the conditions, search teams, volunteer neighbors, and even teams from neighboring counties arrived at the area with flashlights, tracking dogs, and special vehicles for snow. Everyone wanted to help. In the middle of the blizzard, they managed to find certain indications near the road where the vehicle was. Small footprints were identified that seemed to correspond to Derek's boots and, the strangest thing, a pattern in the snow that recalled a snow angel, that is, this figure that forms when lying down and moving the arms and legs. That suggested that the boy, perhaps lost or scared, had stopped at that point next to the road. Sadly, the weather conditions did not allow the search to continue that same night. When the next morning the conditions improved, the tracks were practically erased, this due to the accumulation of fresh snow. Even so, the search continued for weeks. Helicopters, snowmobiles, crews, and others were used to comb every square meter of the forest, but there were no traces. They did not find items of clothing nor his small axe that he carried to help cut the tree. Neither were there bloodstains, recent footprints, marks of vehicles, nothing. It was as if the storm simply swallowed him up. With the passage of time, leads began to emerge that led the investigation down much darker paths. In October 1999, almost a year after the disappearance, someone discovered graffiti in the bathroom of a rest area in northern Oregon. The message, written in a crude way, said something related to the fact that Derek was already dead and buried. The authorities have never revealed the exact content for investigative reasons, but they confirmed that it mentioned the boy directly. The FBI got involved in the analysis of this message and checked the entire place in search of clues, but concluded that it could be a simple, cruel joke, and sadly it was never possible to identify who the author of the graffiti had been. This incident hit Derek's parents deeply, who until then kept the hope of finding their son alive. But from that moment on, they began to seriously consider the possibility that the boy had been a victim of a crime. Among the testimonies collected, there were those who claimed to have seen an unknown car in the Pelican Butte area on the day of the disappearance, shortly before the storm began. It was strange to see other vehicles out there at that time of year, and based on those data, the theory arose that Derek could have arrived at the main road and, completely exposed under the snowfall, have been picked up by someone with bad intentions. If that happened, that would explain why his remains were never found in the forest. Later, already in the year 2000, a dramatic turn occurred in this case. An inmate in an Oregon jail claimed that his cellmate, Frank Milligan, confessed to him that he had kidnapped and murdered the boy. Milligan was a convicted child molester and a violent sexual predator who, in 1997, tried to kidnap another child in the same region. According to the informant, Milligan told details of having found Derek on the road and of what he did afterward. The authorities took this statement very seriously, taking Milligan for questioning, and to everyone's surprise, he confessed his participation and even offered to guide the police to the place where he had buried the body. Derek's parents were informed of this, and with all the pain that implied, they attended this operation. After hours of travel, Milligan pointed to a wooded area in a state park, but there, no matter how much they searched, they did not find any body. Shortly after, the man recanted and refused to sign the written confession, alleging that it had all been a simple lie to try to call attention or to negotiate benefits in prison. This, again, was a devastating blow to the family. Until today, It is not known for sure if Milligan was really involved and hid the evidence too well, or if he was just another manipulator playing with the suffering of a family. Since there is no physical evidence, it was not possible to bring charges against Milligan for this case. And so, with all lines of investigation exhausted, the mystery remains open. Derek Engebretson is still on the official list of missing children in the United States. The speculated scenarios basically boil down to two. Either he perished lost on the mountain, and that is why his body was never found, or he was a victim of a kidnapping, and that crime went unpunished. Either way, both options are terrible. It is possible that the mountain still keeps Derek's remains in silence, hidden in some inaccessible place under layers and layers of snow, but that is something that we may never know for sure. The EVP of the Palace of Linares. In the heart of Madrid is the Palace of Linares, a historical monument wrapped in mystery and legends. Built in the 19th century by the Marquises of Linares, José de Murga, and Raimunda de Osorio, the palace has been a witness to countless stories. Among all of them is the legend of Raimundita. According to the legend, the Marquises discovered after they were married that they were half-siblings on their father's side. This caused the Pope himself to grant them a document that, although it allowed them to remain married, forced them to live in chastity. Even so, they ended up having a daughter, Raimunda, whom, according to rumors, they ended up murdering to hide her existence so that no one would find out. It is said that since then, the spirit of the little girl, known as Raimundita, still wanders the halls of the palace crying and looking for her mother. But what brings this case to this video is what happened in 1990 when the Spanish researcher Carmen Sanchez de Castro claimed to have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, in the building. Among the most shocking recordings are the following. Surely you have heard some of them at some point. Mommy, mommy, I don't have a mommy, my car, and never here, daddy. These recordings were widely disseminated by the media, including the magazine Tiempo, which even gave away cassette tapes with the EVPs so people could have them at home. The mass dissemination of these recordings generated great public interest and a wave of visitors to the palace. Media attention reached its peak on the 29th of May 1990, when about 200 people, including journalists and curious onlookers, entered the Palace of Linares without authorization, seeking to experience paranormal phenomena. The event resulted in minor damage to the building and was covered by various media, consolidating the palace's fame as a haunted place. Shortly after, the authenticity of the EVPs began to be questioned. Experts like Tristan Breaker pointed out similarities between Sanchez de Castro's recordings and other previous EVPs, suggesting a possible montage. And here is where the hearts of many might break, for finally, Sanchez de Castro admitted that the recordings were indeed false, and that she had used an actress to simulate the voices. This confession discredited the EVPs, but even so, they remain extremely popular, as many believe that even if the recordings are fake, strange phenomena do occur in the Palace of Linares, so its fame as a haunted building has not diminished. Currently, there are guided tours and cultural activities in the palace that keep the legend of Raimundita alive, along with the supposed phenomena that were once said to occur within its walls and that, without a doubt, in the 90s, were a complete mystery. The Alien Autopsy video. Many of us got to see this on television, here in Mexico, on programs like Otro Rollo with Adal Ramones, where Jaime Maussan presented this nationwide at high hours of the night, undoubtedly terrifying those of us who secretly stayed awake to watch it. I am referring to the world-famous Alien Autopsy video, a black-and-white recording with an aged appearance that showed the supposed real autopsy of an extraterrestrial being recovered from the Roswell incident in 1947, although the film had only been revealed until the mid-90s. Throughout 17 chilling minutes, 2 military doctors were seen examining the body of a humanoid extraterrestrial on a surgical table, cutting it and removing viscous organs. The images were graphic and shocking. It seemed pulled from a movie, but presented with the seriousness of a secret documentary. The material was released by a British producer named Ray Santilli, who claimed to have obtained the original roll of film from a U.S. ex-military man. Santilli presented it to the world with great fanfare. In August 1995, the U.S. Fox network aired a special titled Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, which was seen by millions of people in the era before YouTube. This was a massive phenomenon. Newscasts, magazines, and talk shows discussed the authenticity of this video. For a moment, it felt like we were on the verge of confirming that, Yes, extraterrestrials had visited us and the government had been hiding this for decades. But many experts, after analyzing the images, began to point out details that did not fit. In the footage, for example, it was written Department of Defense, a term that was not used in 1947 as it was then the Department of War. Several forensic doctors explained that the procedures were inaccurate and that some surgical instruments did not correspond to those of the time. Even so, Santilli insisted that the tape was genuine. For more than a decade, the debate continued. There were those who fervently believed that the government was discrediting this video to keep the UFO secret, and those who asserted that it was all a simple hoax. Finally, in 2006, Ray Santilli himself publicly confessed what many suspected. The video was not 1947 material, but a recreation filmed in 1995 with actors and special effects. The alien was a doll made by an expert in visual effects, and the supposed viscera were animal organs. Later, it was revealed that they used chicken viscera, jam as blood, and a lamb's brain to simulate a realistic autopsy. Santilli admitted that he could no longer keep maintaining the authenticity in the face of so much evidence to the contrary. However, and here is where the doubt remains, he did not want to declare everything a simple fraud. Instead, he claimed that there did exist an original film of an alien autopsy that he had seen in 1993, but that such material had deteriorated irremediably. According to his version, he decided to restore it by recording it again, scene by scene, trying to faithfully replicate what he had seen. That is to say, the deception would have been to recreate the autopsy, but based on something authentic. But on the other hand, Spyros Malaris, a filmmaker who participated in the production of the fake autopsy, asserted that there was never any prior real footage, and that the whole project was planned as a joke or business from the beginning. According to Malaris, Santilli lied deliberately. He did not buy any role from a military cameraman, but invented this whole story to earn money and mock the world a little. In fact, Santilli sold the transmission rights for very important sums and maintained the deception for a decade. In the end, most people, including a large part of the ufological community, concluded that the autopsy video was simply an elaborate hoax, but one that remained in popular culture as a 90s legend. There are those who still maintain that everything was intentionally discredited to cover up the truth. But be that as it may, the truth is that that video, with its grainy and macabre images, caused more than one nightmare for those of us who were barely children in the 90s. Thanks for watching the video, subscribing, and leaving your like, as well as following us on social media. We hope you have enjoyed these mysteries that marked the decade of the 90s. Without further ado, I say goodbye. See you later.